Video games. I mean, anime. Nope. Anime, no. Hold on. Video game anime and the wacky world within. On today's episode of The Laszlo Show, we get to talk about something I am very passionate about and get to deep dive into this wacky world. And I mean video game anime, it sounds like the best thing ever, am I right? And before we get way too deep, I feel like I should actually tell you what it is we're talking about today, because it can get a little bit confusing. I need to be very specific, but it is video game anime and not anime video games. It's a slight distinction, I know, but if you couldn't already tell, this is an anime channel. I talk about anime, except that first video, don't worry about that one, which means that I'm going to be talking about anime that are based off of video games. First there was the video game, and then there was the anime, kinda like the chicken and the egg, except that's a dumb question because it's obviously the egg. The history of anime based off video games dates all the way back to July of 1986, probably long before you were born. Dude, if you're over 37 years old watching me, I thank you for taking time out of your day to watch a little old me rant about anime. On July 20th, 1986, two anime movies were released, and both of them are important to this story. The first movie was called Running Boy, Star Soldier no Himitsu, or Running Boy, The Secret of Star Soldier. It's a movie about a young kid who is just really cracked at Star Soldier. Star Soldier is a real video game released a week before this movie came out, so technically, this movie is an anime that is based off of a video game. But the movie also bombed at the box office, and its entire purpose was to be a marketing stunt for the game, so... But the other movie was something much cooler called Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Save Princess Peach. A year prior to this movie's release, a little game came out that would become a major turning point in video game development. The original 1985 Super Mario Bros. Game, which you are seeing me play right now, quite literally changed the world. It hardly needs an introduction. This little guy is Mario, and he is really good at jumping up and down, and he uses that skill to get to the castle where Princess Peach has been captured, defeating the evil King Koopa in the process. Or at least I think that's how it goes. You see, at this point in time, technology of video games was quite limited. You could probably count how many pixels this game has, so putting text on a screen was really difficult, let alone making an in-depth story. So unlike modern games, where you get a cutscene, 30 minutes of dialogue, and 18 tutorials, old games just kinda send you on your way and you have to figure it out as you go. The anime that came from this game follows pretty much the exact same story as its predecessor, except not really, because Luigi is blue and yellow. I wanted to see Mario and Luigi jump around on blocks everywhere, collect weird power-ups, and stomp Koopas. And just like the games, I wanted to see Princess Peach for a maximum of 5 seconds before the curtain closes and we never see her again. I know I'm not the brightest tool in the drawer, but I do not remember that guy. I thought Mario and Luigi were plumbers. Is that a dog or just some anonymous four-legged creature? Literally, who is that? Personally, I don't remember the sexy mushroom people in the game. The Goombas have a personality? Does that mean... I am in a forest. For the longest time, video game adaptations were pretty weird, and they stretched the term adaptation pretty far. Using the Oxford Dictionary, adaptation is defined as... We can skip the whole definition thing, right? To adapt something is to take a piece of media and change the way that it is presented. Oh, Jesus, it's moving. An anime adaptation of a manga takes the story, the art, character design, and adapts it into an anime. That much should be known. So an anime adaptation of a video game should be the same. You take the story, the characters, the art from the game, and turn it into an anime. Except for the longest time, that's not what happened. The first Mario movie is not a direct adaptation of the game. It does not have the same story, nor the same characters, nor the same design. But that's not to say that they're entirely separate from one another. Mario is still there, Luigi is looking a little different, but that's surely him. The Mushroom Kingdom isn't quite the same, but it's the same place. The whole point of the original game was to defeat King Koopa and save Princess Peach, which is also the end goal of the 1986 movie. It's not as much as an adaptation as it is inspiration. The game inspires the anime. You tell a similar story, but you take creative liberties over the original piece. But why? Why could they not just make a direct adaptation of the game? Well, to understand that, you have to understand that back in the day, games were not good. Well, at least for today's standards, they're pretty bad. The technology of the Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't the greatest, so the games that came out for the system had to be small and really easy to play. The original Mario game is the perfect example of this. There is no text to start the game, that takes up too much space. There's especially no voice acting, they didn't figure that out for a few more years. So the beginning of the game story boils down to you have a character, that character can move, so you move it. And it had to be that way. You can't bog down the experience with sheets of texts and exposition, people would get bored. A direct adaptation of the original Mario game wouldn't be that interesting. So you take the iconic pieces of the game and reform them to make an interesting anime. Pokemon Indigo League. If you're anything like me, you've probably grown up around Pokemon, be it the trading cards, the games, or shows. For me, it was all three. I grew up right in that sweet spot where Pokemon was just taking over the world. To this day, I still love Pokemon, and while the games are... the anime has been consistently good. The show followed the same idea that the Super Mario movie set, in which the anime was not a direct adaptation of the game. You still had the same locations, similar characters, and the same overarching story, but the anime put in a little chemical X. In the game, the first major thing you do is get your Pokemon. In the anime, it's the same, except Ash is late to the party and is forced to take Pikachu. Similar idea, but the anime adds some spice to it. In the game, the first gym is pretty boring. You walk in, avoid the trainers, because why would you fight them, and then you fight Brock. He gives you a gym badge, and you leave. In the anime, Ash actually loses, giving him some character development and a better plan of attack for the next time they fight, which he uses to win the gym battle. Similar outcomes, but the anime builds on the game's story. Pokemon, in particular, was such a treasure trove of content just waiting to be discovered. Do you know how damn marketable these things are? The game marketed them as monsters you could catch and keep as pets. Any girl who liked dinosaurs or boy who liked cute things absolutely devoured this up. And then the anime decided to give these Pokemon personalities and unique traits, these emotions that you could attach to these creatures. Pardon me as I nostalgia jump for a little bit, but do any of you remember the Charmander episode of the anime? Where a Charmander gets abandoned by its previous owner and it's left out in the rain as its tail slowly burns out? That is the one reason I pick Charmander every time I get the chance. I used to be in the Squirtle Squad, but after that episode, I felt like if I didn't choose Charmander, he would get left behind. The Bulbasaur will find a village to protect, the Squirtle is gonna join a gang, but it feels like Charmander had no one. So, I picked him. The interactions I had with the Pokemon series created this spiral where the anime made me care more about my own Pokemon, and the games made me more interested in the new Pokemon, which made me more interested in the new... It is a genius idea. And Pokemon isn't the only series to have done this successfully. While you could probably tell I was Team Pokemon, Digimon was moving down a very similar path as Pokemon. The games fed into the anime, which then fed into the games. Another series that follows this is Cyberpunk Edgerunners. I know it's a little bit out of left field, but bear with me. I tried to make it pretty clear that the reason the Pokemon anime is so good is because it worked with the Pokemon identity to create a unique story. Cyberpunk Edgerunners does that as well. It uses the Cyberpunk 2077 identity to create a unique story, except it's a little different from Pokemon. Where Pokemon created this never-ending relationship that ended up being an autism death trap, Cyberpunk Edgerunners just uses the Cyberpunk property to create something interesting. Cyberpunk as a concept is cool. Futuristic stories are always going to be interesting because it brings up a lot of what-if questions that makes me think about where the world is going right now. A big topic of discussion right now, artificial intelligence, which Cyberpunk tries to reconcile with. Body modifications are probably coming soon. Is Cyberpunk Edgerunners an accurate representation of what body modification might turn into? It is so cool. You can make so many different stories in a setting like this, and they have. Cyberpunk has been a known term since about the 60s, and countless stories have taken up the aesthetic with this world building. Cyberpunk 2077 is not anything new. Other than the method in which it's being told, these stories have probably been told before. But the Cyberpunk 2077 world is massive. Even if it's not entirely unique, it is a massive world, with countless people living in it and an infinite number of stories to tell. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is taking a small piece of that world that Cyberpunk 2077 created and molds it into something entirely new. And the coolest thing about this type of storytelling? The game and anime can coexist in perfect harmony, because they're not stepping on each other's toes. Because the anime is not a direct adaptation of the video game it comes from, you can very easily watch one without the other feeling like you're experiencing the same thing. The Mario game is focused on freedom of movement and platforming. The anime is a story about a damsel in distress. The Pokemon game was about collecting little monsters. The anime follows the adventures of a young boy and his Pikachu. These anime were unique. They didn't feel like... Tell me if you've heard this one. You find an anime that has an incredibly good concept and plot that hooks you at the description, so you decide to give it a watch. The first episode was really good, but the animation is off, the pacing is really bad, it's just not what you were expecting. And as the credits roll, you kind of have to sit there and question why you're doing all this stuff, and then the screen goes black and you're left staring at the reflection, questioning how you got this deep. I'll just read the manga. That might be a little too specific, but I think for people who both read manga and watch anime, you would choose how you consume a certain series depending on which version you think is better. For example, I prefer the Bocchi the Rock anime over the manga. I think the Bocchi the Rock anime was really creative in how they used animation, as well as having the corresponding music. But on the flip side, I much prefer the Berserk manga over the anime. Go watch my last video if you're interested in learning why. For the most part, it's an issue of presentation, where the core of the show, the plot, the characters are good, but the way that it is shown to you is bad, or at least not as good as it could be. And the easiest way to solve that is to change the way that it is presented, to go and read the manga or the visual novel. The nice thing about that is that anime adaptations of manga are usually direct adaptations, meaning that the anime follows the story of the manga beat for beat. And that works because manga is linear. The story and pacing can be adapted into an anime that has the same linearity, story, and pacing. But with video games, it's a little different, because video games are by definition not linear, which means the story isn't linear and the pacing is thrown out of whack. Have you ever played a game where you are told to do one thing and you can only do that one thing and cannot stray from the path in any way? There's no loot to pick up on the way, no alternative routes, you just kind of walk to one place and you're done. Now, you might think you have, but in fact you haven't, because that doesn't exist. If you limit the speed, direction, order of events, dialogue options, character creation, and story outcomes, it wouldn't be fun anymore, because what you've created is a video with no games. Is that what Schlatt is talking about? The greatest part of a video game is being able to choose how, when, and where you do things, because the whole point of a video game is being able to choose what you, the player, want to do. Video game stories are dependent on the player that is playing them. Nier Automata is probably the greatest video game ever made, just straight up. It's a conversation for another day that will probably take place on my second channel, but Nier has changed the way that I view the art form that is video games. And one of the ways it did that was implementing its video game identity into the story and world of Nier Automata. Video games are a very unique form of art, because the story is controlled by the player. Again, the video game is defined by how, when, and where the player wants to do things. Without getting into spoiler territory, the ending of the game is decided by the person who is playing the game, and not like you're choosing what a certain character will do or say. The game turns the screen and addresses the player by name. And I know that sounds really corny, it is way more cool and interesting when you actually play through the game, which I highly recommend you do. But I bring this up for a really interesting point. Even if they don't directly address the player like in Nier, all video games follow a very similar path, in that the story of the game would not exist without the person behind the controller, or keyboard. But anime is different. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but anime is very stagnant. The thing about linear stories, like the ones you'll find in media like anime, is that they will not change whether you are watching them or not. It's like Schrodinger's cat, stuck in a box. Once an anime is made, it gets put into a box, and no matter what happens to the inside of that box, you know that there is an anime inside. It exists in this untouchable, uncontrollable world. You can open that box and see if you like what's inside. Maybe other people will open that box and tell you what they saw and how they thought of it. But that's not going to change the fact that there is something inside the box. You cannot do anything about it. You are simply a bystander. Earlier this year, Nier Automata got an anime adaptation. The release was quite rough thanks to a few unfortunate setbacks, but it recently just finished its runtime. I watched it and was quite dissatisfied with the show. Don't get me wrong, the world building is excellent, the characters were amazing, the music blew me away, but I just kept feeling like there was something wrong. The world was, of course, amazing. They did such a good job at creating a memorable, but at the same time interesting world that kept me hooked for the entire time. Same with the characters and music, 2 being 9S and in particular A2. were just such interesting characters to watch on screen. I loved every minute of it. Getting to listen to the amazing work of Keigo Haoshi with songs like A Beautiful Song is so cool. And especially when they do cool things with it, like sync the music to the fight, it just makes it so much more intense. And the craziest thing of all, not a single one of those things are original. The world is cool because I've spent hundreds of hours exploring it. The characters are good because I was with them through their journey, got to talk to people as them, and did all that exploring with them. And the music? I guess it's the same, but the thrill of playing through the game and experiencing something like this is unparalleled. Whereas in the anime, it's to be expected. And I know your first thought is probably, oh, Laszlo, that's just because you played the video game. And that was my first thought as well. I loved Nier Automata. It's in my top 5 next to 3 different Xenoblade games. So there's a chance I'm clouding my judgment. So I thought we should replicate this study by watching a video game adaptation that I have no affiliation to, and a game that I've never played. Atelier Ryza, Ever Darkness, and The Secret Hideout. And it was really okay. The idea of alchemy is really cool to me, because like magic, depending on who is writing the story, the mechanics of alchemy will be unique. The characters are all really good. Ryza in particular gives us such good vibes, it's hard not to like her. And while I think some designs are interesting, they're all memorable. The story is admittedly pretty basic, at least at the beginning. I can see it starting to unfold all these mysteries that I'm sure are leading to a larger conflict later on in the series, so I guess I can forgive its slow start. From a vague standpoint, I liked my first experience with Atelier Ryza. What I did not like, however, was my first experience with Atelier Ryza, the animation. For the most part, I think the beginning of the anime isn't all that bad. There are some questionable things that don't amount to much, but the first section of this anime isn't terrible. You can very clearly see them set up for future plot points in this first part. For example, at one point you see this girl walk in the background of the screen, and because she has bright pink hair, you would think she's going to be important to the story. Which is fine to do. Setting up for something is really important in a story, as long as you actually finish what you start. Have you ever played a game before? Any video game really, but especially low fantasy JRPGs. I'm talking Harvestella, Xenoblade, any Atelier game, Dragon Quest, Ni no Kuni, the Trail series, the Tale series, hell, even Paper Mario, Mario RPG, Earthbound, Pokemon. You know where in the beginning of the game you get a little path you have to walk down with an obvious objective you can't really stray from? It's the introduction. The player is just getting used to the things that are happening in the game. That's what this sequence feels like. I feel like it should be the introduction to a video game. Because it is. When Ryza starts walking around the town a little later on in the episode, you get introduced to a few characters that have names and seem to have stories, but they never actually get fleshed out because they aren't essential to the story. Almost like in a different medium, you could actually interact with these characters and help them out in interesting ways, like a quest in a video game. In general, the anime feels like an adventure, and that's not a bad thing, obviously. There are many different adventure anime. But those anime work because the adventure feels like it has sustenance. It's a shame when the most impressionable part of the episode, the actual adventure, is turned into a montage. It feels like there's an adventure to be had, and I would like to see these characters actually go and do adventurous things, but they end up rushing through it to get to the plot. Maybe in another format where I can actually take things at the pace that I want to go and experience those interesting things, I would be more interested in this world and these characters. Almost like a video. The bones of this show are really interesting to me. A slice of life fantasy is right up my alley, and the characters each have unique and interesting personalities, but the presentation is wrong. It feels like I should be able to walk around and experience this story for myself. And I can. So I did. Hey, it's me. So I think I might like this game. When I first got into this game, I was expecting to do the average game reviewer thing and play it for about 10 hours, put it down, and then give my thoughts on it and see how it compares to the anime. And it turns out, well, that's not really what happened. It is currently, it's currently like 7:40 on a Wednesday, but it is currently September 27th when I'm recording this video. And you might think, hey, it's been like 3 months since you posted a video. Why is that? Well, it's because I've been playing Atelier Ryza. My short version of this review is it's the most comfy game I have ever played. The long version, I think the game does an amazing job at putting the player in a world that you just have full reign to. As far as I've gone in the story, which is admittedly not very far, I feel like I can do whatever I want, whenever I want to, and however I want. Which brings me to my original point, in that this game is extremely comfortable to play. The game is pretty much put into 3 different sections, or I guess 2. Combat, gathering, and alchemy. The combat is pretty good. While I do think it's the weakest part of the game, I understand why people love this style. It is a turn-based action RPG. I don't really know the specifics, but once you actually get to learn it, it becomes quite interesting. But when I went into this game, I was expecting combat to be like the most important part of it. I think it's a JRPG. Like, of course, battling is going to be important, and it's not. I think the time I spent most playing this game and the thing that I enjoyed the most was gathering materials, which sounds stupid. In most other JRPGs, that's the least fun part. You're having to fight enemies over and over again, and you're having to go to places and drop rates and this and that. But with Atelier Ryza, that was the fun part. That was the thing I did the most, because you just kind of went around to these new places and you battled these interesting creatures and you got all of this material. And I think the reason why I liked it so much was because it was so easy. You could just go around and do all that because you've got something playing in another tab, or you're listening to music and you're just going around and doing this, not aimless because it means something, but mindless activity. There were like quite a few times where I spent probably longer than I should have just gathering materials because I can. And I think the reason that I ended up spending a lot of time collecting things was because the reason I was collecting them was also really cool, which is the alchemy. The reason why I loved the alchemy system so much was because I just kind of sat there and optimized everything. I know to a lot of people, menuing might seem boring. It might seem redundant. It feels like you're not doing anything because you're not playing the game. You're menuing, right? To me, that is my dream. I love menuing. I love trying to optimize everything and make everything look perfect. So in Atelier Ryza, they give you an entire game mode that is basically just trying to optimize every little thing down to the material, the quality of the material, what that material does. I just got addicted to it. You can use alchemy for so many things in this game. One of the things that you need to do is create equipment so that you can gather materials better, or potions so that when you're in combat you can use them, or consumable items that you use to like blow people up and things like that. I think it's super interesting, the scope of things that you can do alchemy for. As I was playing this game, I kind of sat back and started to realize that this would be a pretty shitty anime. It goes back to what I said at the beginning of this review, which is the game is comfy. It's really comfortable to just sit down and play the game and be experiencing this thing firsthand. You can do anything you want at your own pace. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. You can just sit down and do nothing. But you don't get that in the anime. You are forced along this story that never stops and smells the roses. From what I've seen, obviously the story is good. If they weren't going to make a good game, then why make it at all? But I think the essence of Atelier Ryza, it's what is it called? I don't know. I remember the guy in Xenoblade said it really bad. Raison d'etre. The raison d'etre, the bones of Atelier Ryza is that it's your journey. It is Ryza's to some extent, but it is your experience. You get lost in this world. It is you who is playing this game. But with the anime, you're watching these characters go by. You don't get to experience some of the like greatest comfiness and the cool battles and all of this weird, interesting stuff that Atelier Ryza does, the game that is. And I don't think that's good. I don't think the anime is an accurate portrayal of the game. And it doesn't have to be, obviously, but I don't think the story is strong enough to kind of be a replacement for the game and the experience you get from the game. When it comes down to it, I think taking the experience of the game and trying to condense it down to just this one thing, the story and adventure of it, it's not going to cut. It's not going to be good enough to stand on its own. And as somebody who has grown to love Atelier in the past few months, I don't know, I look back on this anime and I'm just... It's sad. It's empty. It's not Atelier Ryza. The first words I ever spoke on this channel are from a video titled Battle Themes in Video Games. It's an old video I look back on quite fondly because it's the first milestone in my career. And when I look back at it, I see all the progress that I've made since then in 2021. It's a video to show how much I've changed. But some things never change, and the first thing I ever said on this channel still holds true. I like video games. It's an art form that seems to have limitless potential. And every time I pick up the controller, I know I'm going to be experiencing something unique to me. I also love anime. As a recluse who could never connect to media like Stranger Things or The Fault in Our Stars, anime was the one thing I felt like I could be myself with. I think people, myself included, instinctively say that anime adaptations of video games are bad because they're different from the game and being different is always bad. A part of me wants to just avert my eyes and curse the demon who made the thing I like different. I have a whole thread of me complaining about the first episode of the Nier anime on my Twitter, and it all boils down to, wah, it's different. And then I go and watch an episode of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and I just see how beautiful anime can be. My love for anime comes out, and I get flooded with so many emotions that I've never felt before, with visuals I thought I'd only see in my imagination. People telling stories I've never seen in a medium created from passion. It's truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I love anime, and I also love video games. But do I love video game anime? I don't like when an anime is trying to be something it's not. When it feels like it's forcing itself into a box it was not made for. I don't like when an anime has to cut corners, tell a story it's not supposed to tell. I like when anime is created with purpose. I love it when you get writers, animators, directors, voice actors, all these different people together to create something amazing. Something you could never find somewhere else but anime. I don't want to go play the video game. I want an anime that was made to be an anime and unequivocally is an anime. Because when people make anime, it usually turns out alright. My name is Laszlo, and I'll be right here, like always. Thank you for watching. See ya.